You know, we're always told that economic growth is this amazing thing, right? More jobs, cool new stuff, everyone's doing well. But what if that's not the full picture? What if the best of times, when everything seems absolutely perfect, are actually the moments we should be the most worried?
So, can an economy actually grow too fast? That sounds kind of crazy, doesn't it? But it turns out the answer is a big yes. History is just filled with these stories. Economies that got so hot they just, burned out and caused massive financial disasters. So, let's dive in and see how this happens. What we're going to do today is unpack this really powerful and kind of scary pattern that just keeps showing up in economic history. We're going to look at how these amazing periods of optimism and growth can actually be hiding the very things that are about to bring the entire system crashing down.
Okay, so here's the thing. While every financial crisis feels totally unique when you're living through it, if you zoom out, you start to see this surprisingly consistent blueprint, a four-stage pattern that shows up again and again. Let's break down the anatomy of a crash.
Right at the very heart of this whole pattern is something called an asset bubble. And it's exactly what it sounds like. Just think about it like this. The price of something, could be a house, could be stocks, could be anything, it just completely disconnects from what it's actually worth. People stop caring about its fundamental value. Instead, it becomes all about this belief, this bet, that someone else will pay even more for it tomorrow. It's this dangerous feedback loop, and it's all driven by pure speculation.
So here's the roadmap for how we're going to look at this. It's this simple four-stage pattern. First, you have the boom. This is when everything's awesome and the party's in full swing. Then you look closer and you see the flaws, the hidden cracks that make the whole thing totally unsustainable. After that comes the bust, the big sudden collapse. And finally, you get the aftermath, which is when everybody has to figure out how to clean up the mess. So, to see how this works in the real world, let's apply this framework to one of the most famous crashes in history.
Okay, first up, we're talking about the big one, the Great Depression. But here's the critical thing to remember. The story of the Great Depression doesn't actually start in 1929 with the crash. Nope. It starts in the amazing decade of prosperity that came right before it, the Roaring '20s.
So, step one, the boom. And boy, was it a boom. On the surface, the 1920s looked like an absolute economic miracle. You had incredible new tech, like Ford's assembly line, just pumping out amazing new consumer goods, cars, radios, you name it. The stock market was going through the roof, and there was this feeling in the air that anyone could get rich. Confidence was sky high, getting a loan was super easy. It really felt like the party was never, ever going to stop.
But you know where this is going. This brings us to step two, the flaws. Because underneath that shiny, glittering surface, the foundations were starting to crack. For one, while companies were making stuff more efficiently than ever, workers' wages just weren't keeping up. That created this huge gap, massive income inequality. And people were borrowing like crazy, not just to buy cars and radios, but to speculate on stocks. This was a super risky practice called buying on margin, which is basically just taking out a loan to gamble on the stock market. And the craziest part? The banks that were fueling this whole fire had pretty much zero regulation. It was a ticking time bomb.
And then, step three, the bust. The stock market crash of October 1929, that was the spark. It lit the fuse on the whole thing. All that confidence, poof, it just vanished overnight. People panicked. They rushed to the banks to pull out their savings, which caused thousands of banks to completely fail. And just to make a terrible situation even worse, the government passed this massive tariff, the Smoot-Hawley tariff, that basically killed global trade, pushing the economy even deeper into crisis. It was just a brutal, brutal downward spiral.
And the human cost was just staggering. 25%. Think about that. At its absolute worst, 1 out of every 4 people who wanted a job couldn't find one. The incredible party of the Roaring '20s hadn't just ended. It had turned into an absolute catastrophe that would scar an entire generation.
So, step 4, the aftermath. This whole disaster forced some really fundamental changes. The government stepped in and created powerful new safety nets. Things like the FDIC, which ensures your bank deposits so you can't just get wiped out in a bank run, and the SEC, which was created to police the stock market. The lesson learned, the hard way, was pretty clear. If you want to prevent these kinds of catastrophic panics, the government has to play a much more active role in regulating the financial system.
All right, now let's jump forward in time. We're going almost 80 years into the future, to the 2008 financial crisis. And you'd think, after everything that happened in the 30s, that we would have learned our lesson, right? Well, as you're about to see, that exact same four-stage pattern was about to play out, all over again. And here we go again with step one, the boom. The early 2000s, man, they felt really good. Interest rates were super low, so borrowing money was cheap and easy.
And this time, the engine driving the whole boom wasn't the stock market, it was the housing market. Home prices were just climbing and climbing, so fast that people started to believe this idea that they could never fall. A house was seen as the safest, most surefire investment you could possibly make.
And now for step 2, the flaws. And this is where it gets kind of spooky, because you can see the exact same pattern repeating. In the 20s, the speculative asset was stocks. In the 2000s, it was housing. In the 20s, the fuel for the fire was people buying on margin. In the 2000s, it was subprime mortgages, these incredibly risky loans given to people who, honestly, couldn't really afford them. And the big problem wasn't just weak rules. It was these brand new, unbelievably complex financial products that took all those risky mortgages, bundled them together, and sold them off, and almost nobody, not even the experts, really understood how they worked.
So, what was the trigger for step 3? The bust? Well, that belief that housing prices could never fall, it turned out to be wrong. Prices started to drop. And all of a sudden, millions of people couldn't pay their mortgages. And those super complex financial products built on top of those mortgages, they instantly became worthless. This set off a chain reaction. Major household name banks started to fail. And the entire credit system, the plumbing that our whole economy runs on, it just froze solid.
This time around, peak unemployment hit 10%. Now, okay, that's not the devastating 25% we saw in the Great Depression. But let's be clear, 10% is still a massive, devastating blow. We're talking millions of lost jobs and years of economic pain for families all across the country.
But here, in step 4, the aftermath, this is where the story is actually a little different, because policymakers in 2008 had learned a big lesson from the slow, fumbling response of the 1930s. This time, they acted with incredible speed and overwhelming force. They bailed out the big banks, they slashed interest rates all the way down to zero, and they pumped trillions of dollars into the financial system to stop a complete and total meltdown. And just like in the 30s, the crisis led to a whole new wave of regulations designed to, hopefully, stop it from happening yet again.
Okay, so we've just seen this same basic pattern play out twice, separated by nearly a century, but with devastating consequences both times. So what's the big takeaway here? What have we really learned from this dangerous cycle of prosperity?
I think the core lesson is pretty clear. Economic growth on its own isn't the bad guy. The problem is the kind of growth we're talking about. See, when your prosperity is built on a really shaky foundation, we're talking way too much easy credit, wild speculation, and flimsy regulations, you're not building a solid structure. You're just inflating a fragile bubble. And we all know what happens to bubbles. Eventually, they pop.
You know, it's pretty amazing when you think about it. The details change, right? It was stocks in the 1920s, it was housing in the 2000s. The specific financial tools are different, but that underlying pattern, the one driven by human psychology, that feeling of euphoria, then greed, and then finally total panic, that seems to be a constant throughout history.
So history shows us the pattern. We can see it crystal clear. But just understanding the cycle, well, that's only the first step. It leaves us with this huge final question. After seeing the boom, the hidden flaws, and the devastating bust play out time and time again, have we really learned how to break the cycle for good? Or are we just sitting here, waiting for the next bubble to start inflating?